You wake up before the light does, and the first thing your body tells you is that it's empty. Not snacky. Empty. And the problem with that this morning is that there is no food anywhere. None in the shelter, none anywhere in camp. Nothing left over from yesterday, because nobody left anything over from yesterday. Setting food aside hasn't been invented yet. Neither has owning food. Neither, if we're being strict about it, has breakfast. Everything you are going to eat today is currently alive, buried, hidden inside a tree, or defended by insects. It's out there in the gray light. It does not know you're coming, and it would prefer to keep it that way. And the question that opens every single day of your life, the one that never gets answered permanently, is a simple one. How long is this going to take? An hour? 6? Are you eating it all today? Because that's the part nobody mentions in the caveman fantasy. The interesting question was never whether they could catch a meal. It's how fast, and what happened on the days they couldn't. Compare that to your morning. Your worst-case food scenario is a delivery app showing a 40-minute wait and a service fee that feels personally insulting. Your food is behind a door. The door is 8 steps away. What's inside it was raised, killed, harvested, cleaned, cooked, frozen, driven across a state line, and stacked on a shelf by a chain of strangers, so long you couldn't name a single link in it, and the total physical effort required of you is standing up. Your ancestors' food came through a supply line too. It was about 9 people long, and all 9 of them were asleep within 10 feet of each other. By the end of today, every one of them will have gone out and come back, and the whole camp will find out at roughly the same moment whether anybody eats well tonight. Light comes up, and the first thing that happens is not a hunt. This is where the whole caveman picture starts sliding off the rails, because the mental image everyone carries, the club, the spear, the guy dragging something home before noon, has the schedule almost exactly backwards. The reliable food of the day, the stuff that will genuinely be inside somebody by mid-morning, comes out of the ground. We know this in unusual detail because a handful of communities were still living this way well into the era of clipboards and stopwatches, and researchers followed them around for decades, logging every hour and every calorie. The Hadza, in northern Tanzania, have probably been measured more carefully than any foraging population in history. What those records show is that the women leave camp in small groups, usually with kids attached, carrying one tool, a stick. That's the whole kit. A length of hardwood, sharpened and hardened in a fire. It's arguably the most productive object our species has ever invented, and it has never once been on the cover of anything. The stick goes into the dirt, and this is where gathering turns out to be a badly chosen word. Gathering sounds like plucking berries into a basket at a leisurely pace. What's actually going on is closer to mining. The target is a tuber, a swollen root that a plant grew as a savings account, packed with starch, sitting a foot or 2 down in soil that's been baking since the last rain. You find the vine. You read where the root runs underneath it. Then you dig, in rising heat, with a stick, into ground that has roughly the give of a driveway. 20 minutes later, you've got a root that's edible in the loosest available sense of the word. Some of them are so fibrous, you chew the starch out and spit the rope back onto the ground. Dinner as chewing gum, except the gum is dinner and it fights back. It works though. And that's the point that reframes the entire day. The people digging come home with food, almost always. The records show women eating and sharing as they go, out in the bush, before they've even walked back into camp. And the pattern holds through pregnancy, through nursing, into old age. A 5-year-old with a stick can feed a decent chunk of herself. Add in baobab pods, and whatever's fruiting that month, and you get a morning that runs maybe 3 or 4 hours and ends, essentially every time, with calories. Folded into that same morning is a second errand that never shows up in anybody's caveman drawing. Water. It doesn't come to camp either. Somebody walks to it, fills whatever will hold it, and hauls the weight back, because water weighs what water weighs, a couple of miles round trip on an ordinary day. Further once the season turns and the close sources dry up. That errand quietly caps everything else. How far anyone can range, how long a hunt can run, How far from a river a group can afford to sleep? Guaranteed is a rare word out here. This is the only place in the whole day it applies. The people carrying bows are running a completely different business. By midday it's underway, and to see why it borders on insane, look honestly at what your ancestor brings to the fight. No claws, no speed worth discussing, teeth that would lose to a house cat's. Standing on open savanna beside an antelope that can hit 50 miles an hour, a human being is, on paper, the least qualified predator on the field. There's exactly one edge, and it isn't a weapon. It's plumbing. An antelope cools itself by panting. Panting is locked to its stride, and it can't do both flat out for long. It runs, it overheats, it has to stop in shade and dump the heat. You cool through your skin continuously, while moving, and you can carry water. That asymmetry is the entire hunt. You're not going to outrun the animal, you're going to out-thermoregulate it, which has to be the nerdiest way anything has ever died. You jog. The animal bolts out of sight almost immediately, which feels like losing and isn't, because you don't need to see it. You need to read where it went, and keep reading, at a running pace, in loose sand, for hours. And that reading is the part that deserves more respect than it gets. In thick brush, the prints vanish, so the good trackers stop following them altogether. They guess instead. This animal is tired, it's favoring one leg, it wants that tree line, it'll cut left at the drainage. And then they run to where the tracks ought to be, and find out whether they were right. Louis Liebenberg, who spent years in the Kalahari doing this alongside the last men who still practiced it, called that the original version of science. Same method we use now. Much worse consequences for a bad hypothesis. His records put the good hunts at 2 to 5 hours and 20-odd miles, in heat most people would describe as a medical event. At the end, the animal can't stand up anymore, and a man walks over and finishes it with a spear. So that's the answer. A few hours. Brutal. Efficient. Done before dinner. Except that isn't the answer, because that hunt is a highlight reel, and highlight reels lie about the season. The day-by-day tally is a lot less flattering. Across decades of records kept in Tanzania, big animals came in at about 1 per hunter per month. 1. 30 mornings of walking out. 1 animal. Let that sit for a second, because it quietly demolishes the picture in your head. The overwhelming majority of hunting days end with a man walking back into camp with empty hands. That's not a bad month. It's a bad day, over and over, with one spectacular one buried in it. Which might be why cave walls all over the world are covered in animals, and almost never in roots. Nobody paints the Tuesday that went fine. Part of the reason is the poison. Hadza hunters coat their arrowheads with sap from the desert rose, which is exactly as pretty as it sounds, and will stop a heart, though not on any schedule you choose. A hit animal walks off. It might walk all night. So the bow is only step 1. The tracking is still the actual job, and the animal gets a head start measured in hours of darkness. Then there's the version that's the chase turned inside out. Dry season, when the animals have to come to water, a man builds a blind out of branches beside a waterhole and sits in it after sundown, on nights when the moon is bright enough to shoot by. No running, no tracks to read, just a man sitting still for most of a night, a stone's throw from things that would happily eat him, waiting for something else to come drink, and staying awake through all of it, which is a skill nobody puts on the list. How fast can you catch a meal that way? You can't. You can only wait for the meal to walk to you. The Duke anthropologist Herman Poncer described one of those days from the inside. A hunter named Imwasad had put a poisoned arrow into a giraffe the evening before, then deliberately let it wander off so the poison had time to work. 4 of them spent the next morning and half the afternoon tracking it. An animal that size would have fed the entire camp for a week. Sometime in the late afternoon, the path bent toward home, and Mossad stopped watching the ground. They never found it. And look what that does to the question. The shot took a second. The killing took a night. The recovery took a day and a half, and then didn't happen. When people ask how fast ancient humans could catch a meal, they're picturing a chase with a clean ending. The real clock runs from, I saw an animal, to, my family is chewing. And for meat, That clock ran out to nothing more often than it ran out to dinner, which is why the strangest arrangement in this entire day matters as much as it does. Afternoon. The heat has peaked and started to slide off, and somewhere up in the trees, a bird is watching you. It's a drab little thing, about the size of a starling, called a greater honeyguide. It eats beeswax, which almost nothing on earth can digest, and it has a problem. It cannot get into a bee's nest. It knows where the nests are. It just can't open them. What it needs is hands, smoke, and something willing to absorb a few hundred stings. You have all three. A person walking through the bush makes a sound. The Yao, in northern Mozambique, use a trilled brah, followed by a grunt, a noise they use for nothing else in their entire lives. And a wild bird that nobody trained, bred, fed, or domesticated drops out of the canopy and starts leading. Chattering, flashing white tail feathers, flying ahead and waiting, tree to tree, until it stops. The people cut the trunk open and smoke the bees down. They take the honey. The bird takes the wax. It works in the other direction too. Often nobody has to call at all. The bird shows up on its own, finds a human, and starts making noise until somebody follows. Researchers in Mozambique actually ran the test. Making the right call took finding a nest from a long shot, about 1 try in 6, to better than a coin flip. And honey is not a garnish out here. In a good season, it can supply something like a fifth of everything a camp eats, the densest, fastest calories in that entire landscape, and the only ones that arrive with a guide. The birds can also tell where you're from. Play a Tanzanian whistle to a Mozambican honey guide, and it's unimpressed. Play the local call, and it comes. These birds have learned a regional human accent, and the humans have kept that accent unchanged across generations, fathers handing it to sons, because switching would break the arrangement. A wild animal and a human being maintaining a shared vocabulary across generations for the sole purpose of getting lunch. Nobody designed it. Nobody could have. And once the bird stops at the tree, the rest happens fast. Cut, smoke, climb, take. Set that against a whole afternoon of running down a kudu, you'll probably lose. You pay in stings instead of hours, plus a certain number of falls out of trees, plus the rule that you leave the wax behind for the bird every single time, because a partner you cheat is a partner who stops turning up. None of this runs at one speed year-round either. In the wet months, there's fruit, there's honey, the game is fat, and spread out. Through the long dry stretch, the berries are finished, the honey thins, the animals bunch up around water and get much harder to walk up on. And the answer to what's for dinner collapses back down onto the tubers, the ones you chew and spit. Nobody's favorite. Always there though, and in a world with no way to store anything, that's the only quality that ends up mattering. Sun goes down. The camp reassembles, and the tally happens. Somebody has roots. Somebody has berries and baobab. Somebody has honey and a face full of stings. 1 man in 3, maybe, has something that had a heartbeat this morning, and it's usually small. A bird, a hyrax, something that fits in one hand. And the great open secret of the whole system is that the hunter has generally taken care of himself already. The logs are almost comically clear about it. On a typical trip out, a man eats a large share of his day's calories on the walk before camp is even in sight. He doesn't come home starving and noble. He comes home having grazed his way across 9 miles of Tanzania. Then the rest gets split. Before that though, there's a second job most people forget is a job. A raw tuber is barely food. It goes into the ashes, and the fire does something no stomach can do on its own. It breaks the starch down, kills what's living in the meat, and turns hours of chewing into minutes. Cooking isn't the cozy part that comes after the work. It's the last mandatory hour of the work, and skipping it costs you most of what the day earned. And then the food moves, which is the part that actually holds everything together, because it isn't generosity, it's engineering. Meat, especially big meat, doesn't belong to whoever's arrow it was. It gets carved up and pushed outward across the camp, to people who did nothing that day, to people who tried and failed, to the old, to visitors who wandered in that afternoon and have no claim on anything. which sounds saintly right up until you run the math and realize it's the only rational response to a system where any one person's day is probably going to flop. You can't store meat in this climate. You can't store much of it in your own body either. But you can store it in other people and collect later, on the evening you walk back in with empty hands. You sit close to the fire while a root cooks in the ashes and fat drips and hisses, and food moves hand to hand around a circle of about 30 people, and everybody eats. Not because the day went well, because the day went well for somebody. Add it up and there's the real answer to how fast they could catch a meal. Roughly 6 hours of work most days, split between mining the ground, winning a thermodynamics argument with an antelope, and negotiating with a bird. No meal was caught. A meal was assembled by a whole camp working separate angles, most of whom failed at their own angle that day. You did this today. Obviously not the antelope part. Everything around it, though. You woke up owning almost no food you had any hand in producing, ran a fast internal calculation on effort versus payoff, and outsourced the entire problem to a network of people you will never meet. And I'd bet real money that at some point this week you stood in front of an open fridge, lit by that one sad bulb, running exactly the arithmetic that whole day was built on. How hungry am I? How much work is this? Is there something better than this within reach? Is it worth going out? Identical calculation. Same species, same equipment, radically better odds. Your version takes 11 minutes and almost never fails. Theirs took all day and failed most days, and the only reason it worked at all is that everyone in camp agreed in advance to fail on different days and cover for each other. The arrangement never ended, by the way. You still don't feed yourself. Somebody grew it, somebody drove it, somebody stood behind a counter at an hour they'd rather have been asleep, and it reached you the same way that meat crossed that fire. Through a chain of people whose day you know nothing about. The circle just got bigger and quieter, and much easier to forget you're sitting inside of. So here's what I'm actually curious about. What's the most work you've ever done for a single meal? I don't mean cooking for a dinner party. I mean real effort, real distance, real stubbornness for one thing you ate. Put it in the comments, because I suspect a few of you have a much better story than I do. I'll be reading them, standing in front of an open fridge, mildly offended that nothing in there appeals to me.